We're back interviewing some bi authors with some wonderful new bi books, and today I am so happy to be chatting with Dr. Lisa Speidel. She is an associate professor, general faculty in the Department of Women, Gender and Sexuality at the University of Virginia. She's also a certified sexuality educator through the American Association of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists, an organization where I may try to go promote my book later this year.
Yay.
Maybe we'll see each other. Her book, The Edge of Sex, Navigating a Sexually Confusing Culture from the Margins, was published by Routledge in 2019. I haven't read it yet. It sounds awesome. And her new book will be published very soon in 2024. We'll talk about that. It is called Bisexuality Beyond Binaries, Celebrating Multiple Bisexual Identities in a World of Erasure. Lisa has worked locally and nationally as an educator for over 30 years with a focus on examining the role of masculinity, healthy sexuality, gender-based violence, and the intersection of racism and other forms of oppression, and much more. We'll talk about it all. Welcome to Two Bi Guys, Dr. Lisa Speidel.
Yay,
Hello.
thank you.
So good
excited
to see you
be
again.
here. I know.
It's been a long time coming because the way that we met is through our books and through our mutual publisher, Routledge. And you are actually one of the reasons my book got published by them in the first place. Do you want to tell that story?
Sure. So part of my work with Routledge has been to review book proposals. And I got to review your book proposal, which was very exciting. And I didn't know about this podcast. And so I got to learn all about it. That's how I found out about you. And when I started working on this, I was like, hey, can I contact that person who is doing this book? So they kind of went from there.
Yeah, I'm so glad Routledge connected us, and that you gave my proposal such a nice endorsement, and then we proceeded to publish. And you actually also wrote one of the endorsements on the back cover of the book, a lovely endorsement. So you're right there in the book. You're in my book, and now I'm in your book. I contributed to. So your book is like sort of an anthology of interviews about various aspects of bi identities, and I got to contribute to a few different chapters. I'm excited to see it in print.
Yeah, so it's a little bit of a different format than The Edge of Sex, which was just an anthology. This one has 13 chapters, 13 topics, and that I'm writing or I've written, and a couple personal narratives in each of them. So I doubled the work. and am down an author since the co-authored the previous book. So it's a very, as you well know, it's a very huge undertaking.
I was going to say, writing and publishing a book is so easy. So it's natural that you wanted to make it more difficult for yourself and add more work to it and do it all by yourself.
Yes. I just needed more work, they kept expanding, You connected me to people, and then they connected me to people, and I was like, "Oh, this is went from 15 people to 34 people." So it's exciting.
I just wanted to add even more to your workload.
Yes, please. It all made it better.
Good. And I'm so excited to see it come out. So this is a book that isn't out yet. I haven't read the whole thing. I've read some chapters that you sent me. I've reread what I said, which when I read it, I was like, oh, that sounds kind of good. I don't remember saying that.
Sounds really good.
That makes sense. Which I have, sometimes people post like a page from my book on Instagram, and I read it like as if I have a bad memory, and I'm like, oh, that makes sense. Oh, I wrote it. Yeah.
Oh, I'm kind of smart.
Like, let me like that. And then I realized that was me.
That's kind of cool.
When is the book? We'll get to more about the book in a minute, but what stage are you at, and when will it be published?
Yeah, final manuscripts going in soon, and that by the end of the year is the plan. As you know, that's a good process. Once you get it in, it still is another 6 months.
Yeah.
So yeah, the plan is by the end of the year,
Awesome.
and yeah, I'm excited because it's been, like I said, it's been a process. It's not an easy process.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, I learned about all that and had some nice guidance from you when we talked to help me through that process because I had never done it before. So
Yes.
I appreciate it. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Now
go
you
ahead.
can help me.
Yeah. Yes. Well, everybody go pre order the book. It's called Bisexuality Beyond Binaries. Okay. So before we get more into the book, I always ask on whatever spectrums you're willing to identify, how do you identify and why are those identities important to you?
Yeah, well, I identify as bisexual, so that is part of a contributing factor to the creation of this book. I'm cis, I'm white, uh, I guess, past middle age. I don't know. If I could live to be 110, I'm middle age. So yeah, those are sort of the main identities. I'm a mom, which is a big part of my identity too.
Nice.
My
Nice.
identities, yeah.
How many kids do you have?
I have one.
Cool.
One kid
Lovely.
who's about almost 14.
Oh, cool. So I haven't read your first book. Tell us a little about like what led to writing that first book, and then what's happened in the meantime that led you to write this one.
Yeah, the interesting thing is actually for both of them, it has been my students that have motivated both books. So
Mm,
I'm teach human sexualities, and I teach a class called pleasure activism, and uh, both of those classes, well, all of my classes, my students do a lot of reflective writing. And so it's very personal. And, I was just talking to a student recently. He was like, I don't know what it is about your classes, but I write, I tell you things that I, wouldn't tell anybody else. And
mm,
there are, such moving stories from people. And I'm so honored that they will be that open with me and that honest. And that really motivated The Edge of Sex. I co-authored it with Micah Jones, who is a former student of mine, and it was his writing. Being brought up as in a fundamentalist, conservative, very religious household as a gay man. Him writing about this was very. Uh, he's an incredible writer too, and we just were like, I think we need to write a book. Let's write a book together. But it was really based on my students' papers, and half the writers in The Edge of Sex are former students.
cool.
So that really was about how terrible sex education is in America and what harm it's causing and who is marginalized, because of that, particularly LGBTQ plus folks, people of color. So that was really the motivator, was sort of the missing voices. And I really wanted I wanted to be like, hey, Bob, you should read Sam's paper, but I can't do that because of confidentiality.
Hmm.
So that really motivated that. And again, with the Bisexuality Beyond Binaries book, there was a couple things that motivated that, which was Rutledge was looking for a book on bisexuality. So that was before your book proposal. And and there was that. And then a lot of students were writing about being bisexual. And I
Hmm.
was like, this is really standing out to me. There are a lot of folks writing about this, and what's going on with that. And also my own exploration of my sexual orientation. So there were sort of three things that happened with this. But again,
Hmm.
what ties between both of them is what students are writing about and what they're going through.
Interesting. Interesting. That makes sense that you're hearing that come up from students more. Because like when we see the statistics, bisexuality is the part of the queer community that's really exploding among young people. Okay, I have
Yeah.
so many questions from what you just said, but first of all, you talked about exploring your bisexuality. Like, was that something that happened more recently, or did you know inside that you identified as bi earlier in life? How did that develop for you?
I think writing this book, I mean, was involved with people of various gender identities throughout my life,
Uh
but I
huh.
never had language for it.
Mm,
And I was like, well, I guess it just was sort of happening, and it wasn't until really thinking of how we define. We go, everybody always talks about Robin Oakes's definition, but that definition really spoke to me. Even though I'd had these interactions and relationships and experiences, um, I just never had language for it. And it was Robin Oakes saying the potential
yeah.
for attraction to more than one gender. And I was like, well, I've already had that because I've already had, sex with various people. And, so
Hmm. Hmm.
um, it really was doing the research that I was like, which as somebody who teaches in gender and sexuality studies, you think that I'd already have some of that language. But I was like, you can teach about things and not self reflect on yourself very easily.
Mm,
Um, so it's this has really been a amazing process for myself and my own discovery of like language. Or I'm a cis woman married to a cis man, and this idea that uh, because you present as a straight couple, you don't get to claim your bisexuality.
yeah.
Um, definitely impacted me.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. We love Robin Oak's definition. Change the game for many people, and
Yes,
it reminds me of
yes.
this meme that was going around in the last few weeks on social media. It's a joke that's like a joke news article. So-called bisexual hasn't actually had sex with an equal number of men and women, and it's like that's sort of like what. Many people thought of as bisexuality for a long time is like if you have an equal amount of sex with the two genders, like
Right.
that's and that there's so many misconceptions in that, and so I we just love the potential to be attracted to more than one gender because there are more than
Well,
two.
it's also right. And it's also, I say this to my students when, there's often that response of like, how do you know you're this if you haven't slept with that gender identity, right?
Right.
And it's like, well, how did you know that you were straight in fifth grade when
Right.
you hadn't had sex with anybody, but you had that crush, right?
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
And they're like, oh, yeah. But it's like, they don't, that sort of self reflection isn't happening about their own attraction. But,
Right.
people who did contribute to the book and different people that I interviewed, or, some people I interviewed and some people wrote personal narratives, talk about how their parents respond to their bisexuality. And there's often that response, like, how do you know if you haven't had sex with this person, right?
Hmm.
Or a different gender identity. And it's like, that's not the defining factor of attraction, right? To actually have had the interaction, right? To actually
Right.
have had sex with someone. I mean,
Right.
I'd been involved uh, with different genders, so but still didn't have the language. So
Hmm.
that wasn't the issue. It wasn't the issue of like, wow, I've had attraction all along,
Hmm.
so I just didn't have the language, or
Yeah.
which is weird. It just didn't. Again, like I said, as a gender and sexuality studies person, this is what I teach. So it
Right.
was kind of this aha moment. I'm trying to think. It might have been like. I mean, I definitely know talking to you, interviewing you is definitely part of that. Um, I feel like talking to Tanya Israel, really I don't know if she
Hmm.
knows that that impacted me that way, but I was like,
Hmm.
oh yeah, this is who, um, and I don't know what the future holds too. So it's
Right.
kind of exciting.
Yeah, I love that. We're always learning new things and
Yes.
learning how to talk about old things in new ways and with more
Yes.
clarity. Yeah, I'm excited to see what happens. And I started exploring my sexuality 10 years ago, almost exactly, and I have no idea what the next 10 years will hold and what new things I'll learn. Um,
And you talk about that in your interview because I just looked at part of that again, and you said that
hmm,
too. It's like who knows, and that's what's so exciting about sexuality too, and sort of that fluidity, which is a big part of bisexuality too. Which
yeah,
we can go into that more, but
yeah,
I mean, what who I was as a sexual being, 30 years ago definitely looks very different, and I think it's so cool that it
yeah,
can be that way.
right. Well, and who we are in our sexual identities is so shaped by the world we grow up in, and what we're told is acceptable and not, and what we see as examples. And so, actually, like when you say, you taught sexuality for many years, but didn't like fully have the language for this, it makes sense to me because it was harder to find 10, 20 years ago. And so I want to ask about the title of your book. Like, I want to talk about each part of the title, but you use the word erasure in the title. So I'm and
Yes.
like that, maybe that's part of why that language didn't exist for you. Like, why did you include this quote "World of Erasure" in your title, and what do you see as the impact of this erasure?
Well, I think there's erasure in like everywhere. And I think that's happening in gender and sexuality studies also. Even what I was teaching, I wasn't teaching about bisexuality.
Hmm.
And I think that's been what's so amazing about doing this book too, is I was like, why is anybody like what's sort of dominating the discourse on academics and what we're teaching? Is it always like sort of an additive approach, like here's a little blurb on bisexuality in the corner of the book,
Hmm. Hmm.
kind of
Hmm.
thing? That's called the additive approach in multicultural education. And so uh the and as I don't know if you had your title already when you started your book, but
Not quite.
titles kind of evolve as you discover information.
Yeah.
And people talk about bi erasure, but like I don't think people recognize to what extent it really exists, and in all spaces,
Hmm.
and even some people, other academics that I know, it's like, isn't bisexuality passe? Is that really like something that's even something that we're supposed to be researching or studying? And it's like, really, you're like
Hmm.
it's a letter in that LGBTQ plus, like
Yeah.
what do you mean are we supposed to be studying this?
Yeah. One of
uh
four letters. There's
yeah.
four letters and a plus, but it's one of the big
Yeah.
four.
Yeah. And I, so even having people respond to like people in my field sometimes, like are like, oh, really? Like, why? And actually, somebody who reviewed my book proposal, is, I don't know who any of those people were, said something like, is bisexuality really even an identity? Like, I mean, is this really something that needs a whole book? Kind of thing. And it's like, wow, uh, how it's, the erasure is like, and that just everywhere, and sort of discovering that with each chapter, and but that it
Hmm.
looks different in different spaces too, right? For
Hmm.
like cis bi women, it can look different. For cis bi men, it can look different. For gender diverse bisexual people, the way that it plays out is can look different. And so the erasure was just such a huge theme, but it's not the same for everybody.
Mm.
And that was really where I'm saying multiple bisexual identities, is to talk about um, how bisexuality is experienced is really different based on different identities. It's made sense of very differently. Treatment of bisexual people can look really different, as particularly when there's intersections of racism and ableism and transphobia. So all the isms,
Hmm. Hmm.
and so that's the multiple, right?
Yeah.
I didn't want to make it a monolith. I didn't want to say this is the bisexual experience, right? Because it's
Hmm.
so different for multiple reasons. Um, Even though there's the common theme of erasure, that erasure looks different too and can play out differently. But it's
Right.
still this discrediting, like it's not real, it's invalid, it's a
Right.
phase.
Right.
Uh, People don't get that you can, it's difficult for a lot of folks that you can be attracted to more than one gender.
Yeah, right. I identify with so much of what you're saying, and like I was
Yeah.
a psychology major in college too, and I was really interested in this stuff. I took a whole class on human sexuality, and bisexuality. I don't remember hearing much about it. I remember hearing about how like homosexuality might be a byproduct of other things and how it's not evolutionarily advantageous. Like, why does it exist? And we would talk about stuff like that. But we never heard about bisexuality and the possible evolutionary advantage of that, which I did an episode with Elliot Schrafer, who wrote a book about bisexuality in the animal kingdom, and they're finding it more and more and finding that it actually has evolutionary advantages in terms of passing on, you know, the next generation.
So
And we
now
know,
it's legitimate because it's all about evolution, right?
yeah, well, there's that too. Right. We don't
That's
need
so cool.
necessarily need an evolutionary argument to see bisexuality
Right.
in humanity and have a reason for it other than, you know, pleasure or other things. Right. Is that what you kind of mean by that?
Well, I meant like, yeah, like, oh, okay, now we can take it seriously if there's an evolutionary purpose. I
Uh,
mean, it's kind of like, orgasms for people with vulvas. It's like there's no evolutionary purpose for this. Why should we be studying this or understand the clitoris or, like,
right.
and it's
Right.
like you said that it is about pleasure, like how much we downplay pleasure is as a part of survival or existence, or
Mm.
it's always this secondary thing. So we have this idea of like, oh, science needs to prove the legitimacy of it. I mean, it sounds like an amazing book. I wasn't trying to put down the
Yeah.
book
Yeah. Yeah.
at all.
Oh
I was
no.
just thinking like, oh, now will people probably, will they actually teach it in psychology classes now?
Uh-huh.
I don't know. I
Yeah.
hope so.
No, no. Elliot would very much agree with you, and he writes about stuff like that. Like we shouldn't need these arguments to take it
Right.
seriously, but also this stuff has been erased, and this science exists too. But actually, I want to ask you about this pleasure because you mentioned your class is called pleasure activism. Like,
Yes.
just briefly, what do you teach in that class that most people aren't getting educated on or haven't been?
Well, it's actually based on the work of Adrienne Marie Brown, who wrote a book called Pleasure Activism, and the idea is that, particularly for marginalized and oppressed people, pleasure is often, secondary or taken away as part of that systemic oppression, and that pleasure is actually empowering and is a way to fight against systemic oppression. So, how do we actually cultivate pleasure and joy, in response to systemic oppression?
Hmm.
So it's kind of part two to human sexualities for me. It's, human sexualities is kind of like sex ed 101 for 20-year-olds, since none of us got decent sex education. And then pleasure activism is like, okay, how do we take it to the next step? How do we not use language like guilty pleasure, or that it's overindulgent, or, things like rest or taking care of ourselves, is something that we're thinking about. Like, what does that look like? What is gender pleasure? Um, you know,
Hmm.
uh, Not just sexual pleasure, but pleasure in multiple ways.
Huh.
It just with our bodies, and it's very. I love teaching that class. It's because
Yeah.
it's very, we're still talking about here are the problems, here are the issues, right? But then it's like, how do we go towards pleasure in these spaces? And
Hmm.
um, most of us don't have that conversation.
I love that. Yeah, I want to take your class. That sounds great. I wish I had taken it 20 years ago.
Me too.
Um, yeah, I never, that's funny. It's like the phrase guilty pleasure. It's like, why does that phrase even exist? Why is there any pleasure that we would like to consider guilty? Uh,
Right. We have to
yeah,
feel bad about it. I mean, that's how we're
yeah,
socialized around sex and in general, but also pleasure is over, it's an indulgence, it's an overindulgence, it's unnecessary for
yeah,
living, where pleasure activism would argue that it is essential, that it is to we shouldn't just be living, we should be thriving.
yeah, right,
And how do we thrive in those spaces? And of course, you don't want to disregard the systems that are in place that are harming people, but in the process, where do people find joy? Where do they find pleasure
right.
to both to fight against oppression, but also find pleasure in social activism too? That's a big thing that Adrienne Marie Brown talks about.
Hmm, that's really interesting. Yeah, because
Yeah.
it can be difficult and depressing sometimes, and like, yeah,
Oh
that
yeah.
makes so much sense to be prioritizing pleasure to me, and yet it's not what I was brought up with. That's
No,
like,
I
uh,
pretty much none of us were. So
yeah, yeah,
there's a lot of unlearning to do, and that idea of like. So I challenge my students. It's like, okay, you want to go do something. You don't try not to put guilty in front of that.
yeah,
Let's brainstorm. What brings you
right,
pleasure? How do you not put shame to it? Because there's this, it's very, I mean, if you're going to do a huge analysis about production and capitalism and, that we're always supposed to be going and producing. And,
yeah,
people talk about feeling bad resting, that like, I mean,
yeah,
if you can't rest, like, how are you supposed to function?
yeah,
So
right. And
it's
I
a joy.
that's awesome. And I hear stuff like that all the time too. And like by support groups I'm part of, and groups I've led, and in my coaching practice, like, people talk a lot about like the costs of exploring their pleasure or experiencing pleasure, or like the risks, or is it worth it? And it's this struggle for people, and it's hard. And people often, I think, get stuck because they don't view their pleasure as important as other things. But
Right.
it is important.
Yeah.
I love that the book is about this multiple bisexualities or multiple bisexual identities, because I feel like that's sort of the amazing thing about the bi community, is that while we have certain things that unite us and experiences that are very common, it's all so different, and there's no two bi experiences that are the same, and it's probably the most diverse umbrella term under the LGBT plus umbrella. I feel like there's just so many variations of what it means. So tell us a little, like, I mean, you spoke to so many different people for this project. I'll list a few names that I'm very familiar with. Like you mentioned, Tanya Israel, Shiri Eisner is in the book, River McMiken, who I've met and done work with, Wolf Hudson, who's been on this podcast, Lorraine Hutchins, A. Billy and Chris. And we'll talk about A. Billy in a moment, because A. Billy passed away recently, but it's great you got a chance to talk to him. But all these and many, many other bi names that I'm less familiar with, but can't wait to read about. Like, what was it like to just get to talk to so many bicons and hear all these different perspectives?
It has been incredible. It was incredible, and everybody was just so like I was like a little scared, you know. I definitely was fangirling a bit with Sherry Eisner, you know, like, and everybody was just so gracious and so kind and so excited and so supportive. Like, you know, I always struggle a little with imposter syndrome. You know, you're like, well, who am I, you know, doing
Uh-huh.
this? But everybody was so enthusiastic. And it just, I, everybody would light a new fire, you know, under me, especially for those of you who are trying to write books. It is an ongoing process of like, oh, and then,
Uh-huh.
and then like,
Uh-huh.
I always feel like who's the Bob's Burgers, Tina? Is it Tina who's always just like, ah?
Uh-huh.
Um, so
Yeah,
to you have to know the Bob's Burgers reference, but to have these people be so excited and enthusiastic, it just helped so much with the whole process to keep my energy going to just keep learning new things from folks. It just was amazing. Wolf Hudson, um, in particular, I was so pumped after that interview. It was so funny, like how
cool.
much that stood out. And
Huh.
I had my own bias. Like I had looked him up, you know, and I was like, oh, you know, who is this Studley guy, you know, doing this porn, you
Yeah,
know?
well, how much did you look up before that interview?
Well, if you follow him on Twitter, you can see plenty.
Huh? Uh-huh.
Or and he's just such a nice guy,
Yeah,
like so down to earth, you know. So the performance piece, you know, is very different than the or you know definitely some crossover, I'm sure. But so he's like a guest speaker in my classes now, so that's been really
cool.
cool. Yeah, to maintain that relationship.
That's awesome.
Tanya Israel, I didn't realize that what she work she had been doing, and it turned out she's the Tanya Israel that my parents were friends with her parents, and we had
Oh,
grown up in the same town.
oh my
And so,
God.
yeah, I had no idea,
Wow.
and it was because of reviewing your book that I even found out about her teaching a class on bisexuality because you had mentioned it in your your book proposal, and I was like, how many people are named Tanya Israel? And then it was like, oh my gosh,
Oh,
this is the Tanya Israel. So it
amazing.
just was amazing. So I couldn't be like more gracious and thankful and honored that people took the time, you know, and were so supportive.
Cool. That's so
Yeah.
cool. I got to get Tanya Israel on this podcast. That
Yes.
hasn't happened yet, but that will happen soon. I have a long
She's a
list.
great speaker also.
All
And
right.
she does uh, baiku is what she calls it, which is bisexual haikus.
Oh, I love that. Oh, well,
Yeah, and one will be in the book for the first page.
oh,
Um,
cool.
I should have looked it up.
Yeah, do you want to
I
share
should,
it with us? We've never had a baiku on this podcast.
yes, but I'd have to find it real quick. Okay, here it is. All right, here's a by Tanya Israel, a baiku.
Okay, let's hear it.
This is going to be in the front of the book. Many bi voices sharing our truths and stories defy erasure.
Ooh, love it. I love it. That's
Isn't
perfect
that
for your
great?
book. That's
I
perfect
know.
based on the title of your book.
I know.
Was that
So,
written for your book or did she
yes,
already have
yes,
that? Okay, cool.
yes.
That's a, oh,
I
awesome.
think, she's very, I mean, I wouldn't know how to do a haiku to save my life. So,
That
I was like,
one's
that's
perfect.
cool. Yes,
Anyone else who has a baiku to share, tweet it to us and we'll share it on the next episode.
yes.
Cool. That's awesome. Yeah, I got to get her on the podcast. So amazing names. I can't wait to read everything they shared with you. And also in this interview format, which I also used for my book, is just like you get a very sort of raw, you know, more like informal. I don't know if that's the word, but you get just sort of from their mouths their real version of it that's not, edited, and it always just feels very like immediate and clear. I
Yeah.
don't know. I like that format.
Yeah, there's a mixture. There's some of the interview format, and then half of it's like personal narrative too, or
Cool.
people. So I like the mixture, but
Awesome.
so it's
Do a little bit of everything like a good
yes,
bisexual.
yes,
Good.
exactly. The book is very bisexual.
Yeah. So I want to start. Let's talk about some of the chapters, and let's start with the final chapter, which is on generational differences and aging. And so you got to interview A. Billy S. Jones Hennon and his husband Chris Hennon Jones, and this is the first podcast I've recorded since A. Billy passed away in January, which I was very sad to hear about, but
Yeah.
felt so lucky to have met him doing this podcast a couple years ago, and do 2 episodes with him and his husband Chris. So what was it like to interview them for this book, and what did you learn from them for that chapter?
Yeah, part of what, and so I also interviewed Lorraine Hutchins too.
Yeah.
A Billy had connected me to her, so that was cool to have those three different voices in that book. I mean, in that chapter, and really, an ongoing theme in that is issues around aging and again, how it's another kind of erasure for older people who are bisexual, the sort of double erasure of being a sexual being
Mm.
as an older person. That was the ongoing theme with all of them. That we assume that older people are not sexual. You stop being sexual around 40, according to the media.
Oh no, I'm 39. Oh god,
Yeah, sorry, you got to stop in a
what am I
year.
gonna do? Oh shit, I'm gonna have a busy year then.
Yes, get going. Um, do it now. Um, but that's how, like, we, just thinking of media representation. So,
Yeah.
Abilene and I were kind of joking around about, I was like, yeah, you're pretty much done at 40, so we were laughing with each other. And but also talking about, kind of like we talked about earlier, how our sexuality changes, how do you accommodate those changes? And, A. Billy had Parkinson's and his mobility had really shifted. He'd had to have some surgeries before we'd had the interview. Similarly, with Lorraine, we were talking about mobility and different disabilities. So that intersection of disabilities was a big part of that topic too. I mean, those conversations, but that does, I mean, ableism intersects with ageism in that sense of like perceiving older people as not being sexual. And they were, also joyful about like, okay, how are we actually making sense of our sexuality, and how do we have those conversations, because it just has to look different. you know
Mhm.
it's just going to look different. And we typically don't, we just have this idea that older people just stop being sexual versus like things just need to be done differently
Mhm.
to accommodate the body changing.
Mhm.
And but when when we have this idea of bisexuality not even being a valid sexual orientation, plus you have people being older, they're sort of doubly, again, that's another sort of intersectional analysis
Mhm.
of erasure and invisibility. And so that was definitely a big theme with that chapter and the conversation with them.
Interesting, interesting. And so how does a bi identity I mean, so yes, there's the perception that older people are not as sexually active, and they kind of dispelled that myth, but how does their sexual fluidity or relationship fluidity or bisexuality affect their lives when they're older?
Well, I think for this generation, I mean, this may be different for us when we're older, but for this generation of older folks, um, they're still fighting other folks in their generation. I don't know, fighting other folks,
Mm.
but fighting for recognition. You
Mm,
know, you've
mhm.
got sort of the old guard activists. I mean, these all three are, A. Billy, Chris, and Lorraine are, activists for bisexual inclusion and visibility and identity. So there is still a lot of having to uh, fight for that, and
Yeah.
I think that's an intergenerational fight. you
Mhm,
know,
mhm.
I mean, what's cool, what I find really powerful about them is just they've been doing this work for decades, and this bisexual people have been around for centuries.
Yeah.
It's not some new fad of this, the younger generation. So that was definitely another theme as far as like, we're here.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Don't forget us. That Billy had talked about going to uh, anniversary celebration for Stonewall, and there was no bisexual flag,
Yeah.
hanging up, and he's like, where's the bisexual flag? That he's still, been fighting for this for decades.
Yeah.
And so that was, definitely another piece of just within queer community being acknowledged and recognized and included. Um, and, so I don't know if that answered your question
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Like, I mean, that's a Billy did all this work so long ago when he was coming up and realizing he was queer, but not necessarily gay, and that he had a fluid sexuality, and like he was there at the forefront of defining what that was, and like
Yeah.
saying, "Hey, bisexuality is real, and this exists, and it's not just gay men, but there's bi men too." And it's interesting that like that activism, I think, trickled down to younger generations over time more and more. And yet, that among his generation, there's people are, they grew up with what they grew up with and they're set in their ways. And that's frustrating that it's difficult, still among peers.
And the cool thing, I feel a part of ageism, is, oh, old people are so set in their ways, and,
Oh,
that they're,
whoops.
well, no, I didn't mean that. I wasn't thinking about what you just said. There are people set in their ways no matter what age, right?
Uh-huh.
And, but uh, what I really appreciated about A. Billy and Chris and Lorraine is that A. Billy in particular was just so savvy. He knew so much, right? Like he was using language that you would think a 20-year-old would be using,
Mm.
right? And so just as far as like inclusive language and talking about, I never know who I'm going to be attracted to next, right? It could be
Mhm.
somebody who's non-binary. Like I'm like, most 80-year-olds aren't talking about non-binary in a way that they understand what it is, right?
Yeah.
And that's a broad generalization, but I think it is hard for older generations when it comes to diverse gender identities,
Yeah.
and particularly that are non-binary and not on the binary. Um, and so that was just something that really stood out to me, like just
Yeah.
how he had his finger on the pulse and was paying attention
Yeah.
and move and informing himself and continuing to be an activist that wasn't um, sometimes there's conflict between generations, right? It's like, no, this is what we need to be fighting for. And then younger generations are like, no, this is what we need. And he was very aware.
Yeah,
I didn't have this feeling like I'm set in my ways and it has to be this. But he was
totally.
definitely having to keep fighting for recognition and
Yeah.
visibility and inclusion in multiple spaces.
Yeah, totally. I got the same feeling from him. He like got what was going on in the
Yeah.
current activism. And I'm so glad you got to talk to him. I'm so lucky I got to talk to him. And after we met doing the podcast, he used to message me, I think on WhatsApp, just like these, sometimes saying, hey, or hotly, we would text a little, but he would send me a lot of like memes, sometimes a bye meme, and sometimes just like some random image or it's a holiday, happy holiday. And it was very cute that we were communicating through WhatsApp for the last couple of years through memes. But
Well,
yeah,
it's so
he's
cool what relationships you can build, and you've never actually, I mean, I don't know if you ever were in the same room with him,
nope.
I've never been in the same room with you, but we've talked
Yeah.
about so much,
Yep.
and it's like, oh, it's so amazing that we can build these relationships and build community that way on, a national level.
Yeah.
I just had no idea. Like, I mean, I think that's been such a huge part of this whole project is just uh, because of the invisibility even in academics, or it just not being part of my training. I mean, even within the context of ASEC certification, I feel like it wasn't part of my training, so
Hmm.
to know this network of people and to have the privilege, to connect with these people. I mean, I totally feel the same way. I feel so lucky,
Yeah.
and it was because of you that I got to connect to A Billy, so it just keeps,
Yeah.
this nice circle keeps happening. And there's so many people that are doing this kind of work, and we don't know that. We aren't talking about them. We, just in sort of major academic spaces. And anyway, so that's part of my
Yeah.
work is to spread the word.
I love it. And you're doing it. And everyone go buy the book and you can read about all of these diverse bisexualities. Let's briefly run through a couple chapters, and I just want to hear a little like what you learned about certain things, or
Okay.
what your views are. So I want to. I love that you have this chapter about the joys of bisexuality. Noticed you talked to someone named Robert Cohen for this chapter. I wonder
Who's
what he
that? I
said.
don't know who that. I can't remember. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I've talked on this podcast about like queerness is a gift, and like it used to be this thing that was really shameful for me and stressful, and I didn't know what to do about it. And over time I've realized it's something that brings me joy. So I'm curious, like, why did you include this chapter? I think it's the second chapter.
Yes.
And what do you find joyful about bisexuality?
Well, it ties in. I mean, I was already teaching pleasure activism, so it definitely there's been a lot of talk around queer joy, sort of using that term, and how do we have conversations around that, and uh, so much of the conversation around gender and sexuality studies, like I already talked about, is about the harm and the struggle and the suffering, which is such a very very important part of studying that. Um, but I think it's Lucy Fielding who talks about this. I quote her in the chapter on gender diverse identities that, we have a tendency to only talk about the death and, destruction of trans people, say, for example, and where do we, shouldn't we be talking about, the joy too?
Hmm.
And so there's an ongoing theme about joy in general. And I had already picked that as a chapter, but interestingly, while talking to Tanya Israel, I, was talking about this book is about the intersections of oppression and the intersections of biphobia and bi erasure and monosexism and racism and cis sexism, all these isms. But I was asking her a question about, as a person of color, the intersection of racism, and she kind of was like, yeah, I am facing that, but I want to talk about the joy,
Hmm.
and kind of, bypassed that. And how it goes back to my conversation about pleasure activism. This is equally as important.
Mm.
And it needs to be part of that conversation to uh, enact social change, I believe. Like if we're really going to create community, we can only do so much around the ways in which we're being harmed. We also want to celebrate, and that's where celebrating is in the title too. The title has a lot of
Hmm.
meaning.
Yes. Yes, we
um,
hit on most of the words, but not every single word in there. It
yes.
does.
So the celebrating piece is about how are we intentional around joy, so that that is a component of fighting bi erasure and biphobia too.
Yeah. And what's joyful for you about this identity?
Well, I feel like you and I might have talked about this. I can't remember, but there's something that's so freeing.
Yeah.
It's just when I teach about human sexualities and I teach about different sexual orientations and the idea of like attraction to more than one gender, it's like, for so many people, it's like, huh? That's so foreign. But it's like, isn't that cool?
Yeah.
Like I'm like, is that so cool that? And I think it's happening to way more people than they realize. But there are all these, pressures and expectations and structures of masculinity and femininity, and that you're not allowed to go there, kind of thing. And like, wow, how freeing is it
Yeah.
to think like, wow, this is always what has been going on. All these crushes I've had growing up, and it wasn't heterosexual, you know,
Yep.
and so for me, it's really celebrating the fluidity and how freeing it really is,
Yeah.
and that's just kind of fun,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
and allows for like all these amazing people that you can meet and
Right.
have these conversations. And I don't know, it's just yeah, I always go back to the freeing
Yeah.
piece.
I think we must have talked about that because I feel exactly the same way. That it's just like I grew up with so many, you know, expectations of what your sexuality and your romantic life and family life should be. And I didn't even realize how limiting that felt at the time, and until coming out and realizing, oh, like whatever happens is okay, and there's all these possibilities, and it is just really exciting and liberating. Yeah.
Yeah, liberating. That's the word we
Yeah.
need.
Yeah.
Liberating. I mean, I think that can scare people, of course. A lot of people
I was
like
gonna
their
say.
structure and their categories, and it's like, okay, this is how this works,
Yeah.
and this is how relationships are supposed to be. Um, but yeah, I think the liberating piece is huge.
Yeah.
And but I also really like people. Like I love meeting people, and
Hmm.
it's also just it's so cool how everybody makes sense of their own bisexuality differently too. Like what that actually means. Um,
Yeah.
so I love learning about that. I don't know. There's a lot to it that uh, life isn't boring.
Right, right. Right, you
Like,
can learn so much from other people and how they experience things and go, "Oh, maybe I should
yeah,
try
and
try
maybe
that on."
not. Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe not.
And
Yeah.
then maybe
Yeah.
not. You're like,
Yeah.
"Nope, nope, that's not gonna work." But
Yeah.
yeah, it's we have a common theme here, liberating.
Yeah. It is
In
scary
conclusion.
sometimes. All
Yeah.
that those possibilities can be scary. Even for me, sometimes I'm like, oh my god, I would like, I don't know what to do now. There's so many options, but ultimately, it is. I think it's liberating and freeing, and that sort of outweighs the anxiety I sometimes have about, what should I do.
Yes.
So you have three chapters in here, sort of organized by gender. There's a chapter for cisgender women and femininities, a chapter for cisgender men and masculinities, and a chapter called gender diverse identities. So we could probably do an entire episode on all this, but just to give people an overview, what did you learn, writing these chapters and as you interviewed people across the gender spectrum about bisexuality?
Yeah, that's a big question.
Yeah.
But so, buy the book and read the chapters. But
Yes.
s- uh, again, like I was saying earlier, right? Like as bisexual people, there are some collective experiences of erasure and biphobia, and perceptions of it not being a valid sexual orientation. That there is that common theme, but it, like I was saying, it plays out differently for different identities. So part of what I'm writing about are what are the expectations of femininity and what does that look like for cis bi women? What are the intersections of racism that may play a role in that context? And for you, so there's this whole idea. So you had asked maybe like what are some differences between those, there's
Sure.
definitely some
Or
differences between those chapters. Since there are three separate chapters, there better be some differences. So just some sort of bullet points from each chapter is thinking a little bit about what are the pressures and expectations of femininity and how does that impact sexuality and how does that impact bisexuality and for cis bi women, what is often common is this belief that bisexual women are accepted in our society, right? Like it's like, oh, they're kind of allowed to go do that.
Mhm.
Um, and is that really true? you know, and in what context is that actually accepted, quote unquote, right? Because it's about sort of the male gaze and straight men's perception of bisexuality, and in contrast to cis by men, you have a cis man do one sexual thing with another man and he's already labeled gay,
Uh-huh.
right? There's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of a huge part of your book, right?
Yeah.
Your
Yeah.
book, that men, it's like, oh, men can't be bisexual. And I've got plenty of students who believe that, right? When I give up that, bring up that example, it's like,
Hmm.
no, 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 no. If they had one blowjob with a guy, they are definitely gay. And
Uh-huh.
I'm like, so men can't be bisexual? No. Can women? Yeah. Like, oh, sure.
Uh-huh.
So each of those chapters are sort of breaking down, you know, uh, kind of some myths and misconceptions around that. The idea of masculinity being associated with being straight, and that if you're doing anything that's perceived as feminine, are you less masculine? um, the hypersexualization of bisexual women, particularly bisexual women of color, um, all the fetishization. Those are some of like the differences that are happening with the cis chapters.
Uh-huh.
And
How does the non-cis community or the trans and non-binary community factor into this, in from what you learned in interviews?
yeah, a big part of that chapter is actually uh, took some of Lucy Fielding's research, who I had mentioned earlier. She wrote a book called Trans Sex: The Clinical Approaches to Transsexualities and Erotic Embodiments, with Rutledge too.
Mhm.
Yay, Rutledge!
Yeah.
we're promoting our publisher. Um, but she talks a lot about desirability politics and and erotic privilege, like who is allowed to be erotic, who's allowed to be a sexual being, and um, how we take that away from trans and non-binary folks in particular, as she uses the language as unlovable and unfuckable. That's how society is sort of presenting gender diverse identities. And so the
Huh.
intersection of that kind of transphobia with biphobia, how does that double discrimination, if not triple discrimination, if
Mm.
it's trans folks of color, really erase validity of their lived experience, their bodies, their sexual orientation. Um, so again, those are three very different lived experiences of bisexuality based on those gender identities.
Yeah.
There's some commonalities. There definitely can be some fetishization
Uh-huh.
across different gender identities that sort of manifest in different ways. Like, are bisexual men fetishized by gay men potentially? Are bisexual women fetishized as, you know, somebody who's ready to do anything, anywhere, anytime, and be in a threesome and be a unicorn,
Yeah.
kind of thing? And then, trans bodies being fetishized in that way also. So that's some of the interviews are about that piece. Um, One of the people I interviewed, it's a non-binary drag queen who is bisexual and Black, and so that interview was definitely about a lot of intersections. But because of their Blackness and stereotypes of uh, being perceived as a Black man, dressing in drag, how were they fetishized? So there's a lot of layers going on
Yeah. Cool.
in all of those.
Very interesting. I can't wait to read more. I also want to ask you about the chapter about dating, marriage, monogamy, non-monogamy, and there's another crossover of my book and your book, because a lot of the bi men in my book are, many of them are monogamous, but almost all of them ended up discussing that with their partners, and many did open it up. And so while we know bisexuality does not equal non-monogamy, what did you learn in those interviews about the connection between fluid sexuality and people exploring the monogamy spectrum as well?
Yeah, I part of that conversation was talking about, like, there was one person, it was actually River, who was talking about, they kind of joke around about I'm a bad bisexual because I am all these stereotypes,
Yeah.
Like, and, you know, because there's this stereotype, right, that like bisexual people will just sleep with anything, that
Yeah.
moves, and they're not trustworthy, they're going to cheat on you, and they're non-monogamous, and so kind of breaking down some of those stereotypes. For most folks, talking about non-monogamy was in the context of already being in a relationship. And I mean, similar to some of the things that you discovered for your book as married people.
Hmm.
I mean, it wasn't just married people that are part of the chapter, but definitely folks already being in a relationship and not being able to have explored their bisexuality beforehand.
Hmm.
Has is a common theme, and how to sort of navigate that already being in a relationship.
Yeah.
um and uh I think that it's just so common, that people didn't
Yeah.
have the space to explore it.
Right.
So now they're wondering if this, is a way to be able to do that. And I
Yeah.
think we have a long ways to go to really understand non-monogamy as a relationship structure, and one that can be really joyful and functional and work well. Because I
Right.
think the stereotype is that it won't.
Right.
A lot of people know people who, it's like, oh, they opened up their marriage and then it,
It didn't work.
it crashed and burned, and so that's their association
Right.
with non-monogamy, and sort of not understanding how it's if it works for people, it's giving them this space to actually explore their bisexuality.
Right. Yeah, that comes up so much in people I talk to, of just like how, the reasons they want to explore it, and or if they didn't get to it when they were younger, it makes perfect sense, like to really understand your identity and live out these fantasies. And yet it's very hard when you're in a marriage that has been monogamous until then, and it's very hard to bring up, and it's hard for a partner sometimes to understand like what's really going on and how stable is this relationship. And it can be very stable, and opening
Right.
things up, I think, can actually lead to more closeness under the right circumstances. But we don't often see those examples of that, because there's still a lot of stigma around that too. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and something that I think that's you can have the folks that never got to explore, but you also have the folks who knew about, recognize their bisexuality, identify as bisexual, but when you're in a monogamous relationship, that bisexuality is erased, right? So
Yeah.
if you're in a straight, I mean, by society, your bisexuality hasn't left, but by society, there's this idea that, oh, you're in a straight relationship or you're in a gay relationship, and there's no like, okay, well, now you're gay.
Right.
Right? Like another way in which it's erased. And I think non monogamy sort of allows for um, that erasure to decrease some. It doesn't,
Yeah.
that's not an answer for everybody. And, your
Right.
bisexuality doesn't have to be defined by who you're involved with. But
Right.
I think for some people, it is important.
Yeah.
And to know that non-monogamy is a possibility. And then there's plenty of people who are like, I got married, it's straight passing or looks straight, but that's okay. And I know I'm still bisexual,
Right. Right.
don't
Yeah.
have to act on my attraction,
Right.
right? But then there's other people where it's like, this is a very, having that opportunity to act on that attraction is a very important part of who I am. So non-monogamy can be a great option for that. And I wish we could do better at sort of understanding the beauty of it and the strength of it and the
Yeah.
power behind it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like a lot of partnered bi people are caught between a rock and a hard place, because it's like, you know, you want to express your bi identity even while monogamous, but then people will say, well, why does it matter that you're bi if you're only sleeping with
Right,
one person? But it does. But then if you open things up and do explore that, then there's the stigma of being non-monogamous applied to that partnership. So
right.
it's
And you're
like,
just, you know, just want to sleep with anything that moves,
Right.
and
So it's
like,
like either way, the exploring or not
yeah.
exploring your bi-ness in reality with other people, there's sort of like stigma on both sides of that. It's unfortunate.
Well, I think it's interesting too because I think we have this idea, some people talk about like straight passing privilege. And one person I interviewed was like, even if, she's a cis bi woman, and she's like, even if I'm in a relationship with a man and people think I'm straight, I'm still dealing with how I'm being treated as a bisexual person. Like,
Yeah.
say she's dating somebody who doesn't quite get bisexuality. So there's still unique issues that are going on there, even if you're just passing as straight,
Yeah.
right? Or, and okay, yes, that is, can be a privileged status by society seeing you, but the lived experience is still harmful, right? If people
Right.
aren't recognizing that your bisexuality still matters.
Yeah.
And so it's of course that's not the answer for everybody, and there's lots of different relationship structures. That chapter goes into dating and dating apps,
Yeah.
and relationships and non-monogamy. So it's kind of a very full chapter. um,
Cool.
but just again to say, there are all these different things that are out there. How do we celebrate them all?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Okay, everyone needs to buy the book and actually read about all the details in these chapters. Okay, last thing I want to do, like, we don't have time to dive into every other chapter, but I just want to tell people what's in the book and then ask you a general question. So there's also a chapter in there about media representation in TV and film. There's a chapter about pornography and sex work, features Wolf Hudson among other people. A chapter about kink and BDSM, which I'm very interested to read. A chapter about religion, a chapter about mental health and the prevalence of violence, and a chapter about disabilities, and then also the generational differences in aging we talked about. So just we don't have time for all of it, but is there a chapter in there that like you were most surprised by what people told you, or where you really your beliefs were really challenged or changed because of stuff you learned from the people you talked to?
I think the one on sex work and pornography probably is what stands out the most as far as like learning, and probably BDSM and kink too, just being sort of on the outside looking in and hearing, from folks as sex workers, and Wolf as a porn star. Um, it's just a space that, you know, I just knew nothing about.
Uh-huh.
And I said earlier how that his interview in particular lit a fire,
Uh-huh.
under me, because I was just like, yeah, I mean, there's sort of really simple things like what makes pornography bisexual, right? And I was
Uh-huh.
like, oh yeah, like if it's two women together, that's lesbian. If it's two men together, it's gay. If it's a man and a woman, it's straight. So you kind of have to have the third person there to show that,
Right.
it's a bisexual experience,
Uh-huh.
and there's just things like that as far as representation, and just knowing like the work that Wolf's doing, and he has such a big heart, and like just this idea of like um, ethically produced, good representation, and uh, consensual production, of the porn that he's working on. I mean, it was just amazing, and I learned so much, and I just wouldn't have another person that I interviewed, Danny Rose, connected me to Wolf. It's the BIPOC initiative, which is for BIPOC sex workers. And, again, just the networking. And it's just not my lived experience. So it's just so cool to see in that space, like bisexuality is everywhere. And it's a big part of every facet
Yeah.
of life. And I just didn't even know, like, I always pictured like bisexual porn was like, the two women together because it was about the male gaze and, like kind of that trope. And it was just
Interesting.
cool to be like, oh yeah, wow, this is this whole other
Yeah.
kind of porn,
And it brought you to Wolf Hudson's Twitter account, which is very fun to watch.
Yes. It just pops up periodically.
Yes, bringing you
And I'm like,
dose
okay.
of a little dose of bisexual joy every once in a while.
Yes. Yes. You're
Lovely.
trying to just figure out the news, and then you're like, okay, go Wolf.
Yeah, perfect to splice into the timeline. Love it. Cool. Yeah, I can't wait to read what you talked to Wolf about. He was great to have on this podcast towards the beginning. I love talking to him, and I'm really interested in that chapter on kink and BDSM. We could talk about that all day. But this has been great. Thanks for coming to Bi Guys finally, after we met maybe like 2 years ago working on these books. Thanks for coming to talk about the book, and thanks for writing it. And thank you for making my book happen and collaborating. I'm so
Yeah,
glad we
well,
got the
thank
chance to
you.
collaborate. Yeah.
Thanks for having me, and
Yeah.
thanks for writing your book.
Yeah. Everyone go buy both books.
It's all the bi love.
Indeed. So so your book will be published, we think, by the end of this year. So
Yes.
I'll make you all aware of that from the Two Bi Guys account. But where can people find you if they want to follow your work or learn more?
Yeah. My webpage is lisaspeidel.com.
Cool. We'll put it in the show notes. Check it out.
Yes, there you go.
And keep your eyes peeled for Bisexuality Beyond Binaries, BBB. I like it.
Little play on letters there.
Yeah, as many B. Actually, the two of the words start with BI, so you got a lot of buys in your title.
Yes.
Love it. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. Looking forward to the book.
Thank you.
Two Bi Guys is produced and edited by me, Robert Brooks Cohen, and it was created by me and Alex Boyd. Our logo art is by Caitlin Weinman. Our music is by Ross Mincer. We are supported by the Gotham, and we are part of the Zencastr Creator Network. Visit patreon.com/Robert Brooks Cohen for bonus content, early access, and exclusive video episodes. Thanks for listening to Two Bi Guys.